It is now time for our men to come forward and expound the Parsha that were assigned to them and what God has revealed in their hearts. I would like to call first Brother Jonah.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. When Richard gave me this Parsha, I didn't know that I'm going to discover something fantastic. And it's going to be a very inspirational to some people here right now. But let me go right away to, this is actually Exodus 16, Exodus 6, 19 to 30. And then it continues on to Exodus 7, chapter 7, verse 1 to 7. I'm going to shorten it. This is actually a collection of the names of the clans of Levites according to their generations. Let me start with Exodus 6:18, the sons of Kohath. Actually, I will read the meaning of the names in Hebrew because this is so fantastic. Amram means ingathering. Ishar means fresh oil. Hebron means companion. Uzziel, God is my strength. And Exodus 6:19, the sons of Merari, which starts with Mahali, means the pleasant one. The Malites and Mushites were among the most important of the Levitical families at the time of the Exodus. Amram is the man of the house of Levi, which was mentioned in chapter 2, verse 1. Which continues on that the fourth generation of those who would go to the land of oppression and should return to the promised land. So Eleazar, on verse 20, means God has helped, who became high priest upon the death of Aaron. The sons of Korah, however, the sons of Korah were destroyed with their father in the uprising in the desert. The three sons mentioned here became the heads of the families of the Korshites, whose descendants were famous temple singers in David's time. Let me focus on Exodus 6:25. And Eleazar, Aaron's son, took him as on one of the daughters of Putiel to wife, and bore him Phinehas. Phinehas is an Egyptian name, meaning dark-colored person or black. Phinehas, without Phinehas, the Levites could have been destroyed because of its disloyalty to the Lord. But because of Phinehas, it continued on. That name means everything to a lot of people because of his dark complexion. Under the circumstances, it is surprising to find so many Israelites bearing Hebrew names, which is a fact due to reluctance to accept the Egyptian ways and their language. And I will cut short this presentation because despite the fact that the Lord has shown his power, the Egyptians did not recognize the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. And today it reflects the character of the world because Yeshua himself said, this adulterous generation. And I'd like to end with Jeremiah 3:8. The Lord divorced Israel for its backsliding. And the meaning of backsliding in the Hebrew context is apostasy. I ended up my presentation.
Amen. 3 minutes. Our next presenter will share to us Exodus chapter 7, verses 8-25. Is yours truly. Let me read it to you. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, work a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and thus they did just as the Lord has commanded. And Aaron threw his staff down before Pharaoh, and his servant, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called for the wise men and the sorcerers, and also the magicians of Egypt, did the same with their secret arts, for each one threw down his staff, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart was hardened, yet he did not listen to them, as the Lord had said. This is the first time that Moses and Aaron will face the mighty Pharaoh after he spent so many years in the wilderness. And I can imagine how nervous Moses will be. It's the first time in his life he will go back to the land he grew up. And Egypt back then was not just an ordinary kingdom. It's a huge kingdom, and they have many territories. And he will face Pharaoh to ask for them to give permission to leave Egypt. Anyway, what God imparted in my heart for this passage is that the Lord gave Moses a specific instruction how to speak to Moses, what to say, and God knows exactly what's Pharaoh's response. So I think Moses is very convenient and confident. So he did exactly what the Lord said, because God has specific instructions. He was instructed to throw the staff, so it became a serpent. But I don't think Moses expected that the Pharaoh's magician will be able to copy it. What do you think Moses' expressions? What do I do? This is not part of the plan. However, his staff swallowed the rest, the two other serpents. What I learned from that is, Jim said during the blessing of the children, that God's serpent is mightier than the other one, obviously. But what I learned from that is that if we encounter circumstances that we do not expect, although we follow God's instruction carefully, exactly, God will take care of it. He did not expect it. He didn't also expect that the serpent will follow the two other serpents, right? But you see that God has, will take care of it. As long you follow God's instruction exactly what He said. Amen? Amen. The next speaker will be to share us regarding Exodus chapter 8. His brother Jimmy Norega.
Amen. I'm a little blind. I don't have my glasses. Amen. So I'll be discussing Exodus chapter 8, verse 1 to 15. Okay. There are different points within this chapter, and I'll enumerate it first before I go through it. Point number 1, Pharaoh was threatened. Then, point number 2, Egypt was inflicted. Then the magicians were permitted to imitate the plague. Pharaoh become less intense and under this plague. The next one, God hears Moses and acted accordingly. And lastly, Pharaoh hardened his heart. Same as with all other plagues that was inflicted on Egypt. Okay. Pharaoh was threatened. God said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'If you refuse to let my people go, I will smite Egypt with a plague.' God could have plagued Egypt with lions or bears or wolves or with birds of prey, but he chose to do it by these despicable creatures. Egypt was inflicted. Through Aaron's staff, Egypt was inflicted with a sore in the form of frogs' infestation. They should neither eat, nor drink, nor sleep in quiet, but wherever they were, they should be troubled by these frogs, because based on how it was presented, it will be present everywhere. Bedrooms, beds, kitchen, wherever you are, the frogs are there. Imagine you eating, and there are frogs around. Magicians were permitted to imitate the plague. They also brought up frogs, but could not remove those that God sent. This shows that God is more powerful than the magician's power, because the magician's power can only deceive, but God's power can destroy those who deceive. Pharaoh becomes less intense under this plague. He begs Moses to intercede for the removal of the frogs and promises that he will let his people go. But God, after that, okay, he approached Moses, and Moses approached God, and God hears the cry of Moses. He hears the cry of the righteous and responds to their prayers. Pharaoh hardened his heart. Pharaoh saw there was relief from something difficult. He hardened his heart till the heart is renewed by the grace of God. The thoughts made by affliction do not abide. The conviction wear off, and the promises that were given are forgotten. Sometimes people are like that. If they see that there's relief, there's no more hardship, they go back to what they were before, and they forgot what they had promised. In summary, God's patience is shamefully abused by impenitent sinners. The respite he gives them to lead them to repentance, but they are hardened by and while he graciously allows them a truce in order to make peace, they take that opportunity to go against and stubbornly refusing to change. There's a lot of people like that. And that's the issue in this chapter. It displays that people, when they are in a situation where it's difficult, they cried out. They cry out, say, Lord God, help us. But after a while, when they see or they feel that they are out of difficulty, they go back. Amen.
Amen. The next presenter will expound.
Yes, I concur very much with Brother Jimmy because I'm just going to kind of continue where you left off, so to speak. Yes, I'll just continue where he left off, but it's very interesting what he said at the ending of his summary, that you're in some situation, you pray for it, and you get the fever, and all of a sudden you're back to normal, and then you go back doing the same thing. So anyway, my topic is from verse 18, chapter 9, verse 18 to 35. Behold tomorrow about this time. Now, God now indicates the kind of punishments which he was prepared to inflict, that he would smite with a hail both man and beast and part of the crops. It sometimes indeed happens that the corn is destroyed by hail, and occasionally that great injury is thus inflicted even on men and beasts. It is regarded as an unusual blessing if 10 or 15 years pass by without such a calamity, but God makes it apparent by certain signs in the judgment, which he has determined to execute, that the hail did not arise from natural causes, but that the atmosphere was manifested armed by him for the battle. First morrow is fixed, nor is this enough. The hour also is added. Then again, it's unusual violence, such as had never seen before. It's appointed. It is from an extent and from the extreme boundaries of Egypt, from one side to the other, as well as its expansion over its whole breadth. Now, scarcely once in 20 years will a storm so widely prevail, flying as did like an arrow, but restrained with narrow limits. It will not diffuse itself far and wide, but lastly, the distinction I'm trying to add is between the Goshen and the rest of Egypt. Yes, hence it is plain that this hail was not produced by an accidental impulse, but made to fall by God's hand, in a word that it was not the drops of moisture from the air, but a portent which transcended the bounds of nature. So I'm in verse 22, the Lord said, the rod of Moses is again employed to bring on the storm, not so much for Pharaoh's sake, as that Moses may be the more encouraged to the remaining contest when he sees the proof of his vocation renewed. In the meanwhile, we have to observe the trial of his faith. Since before he had received the command to stretch forth his rod toward heaven, he had not hesitated to predict Pharaoh's grievous and miraculous hail. The text also shows that Moses was commanded to execute that of which means was before unknown to him. Also, both Moses himself had learned, he was ought to now learn that all the elements, although without sense, are still ready to render any kind of obedience to their maker, since at the stretching of the rod, the air was troubled in an incredible manner, so that it hurled down an abundance of hail for the destruction of beasts and men. And Pharaoh sent and called. If this confession had proceeded from the heart, it would have not been betokened by repentance. But Moses immediately perceived that fear in the heart of the wicked is not a principle which governs them in lasting duty. And this was more manifest in the result. Although we must at the same time recollect what I have already touched on earlier on, that Pharaoh did not lie designedly, for when he seized by terror, he caught every means to appease God, but soon after relapsed into his former state of mind. For although with a fox-like cunning, wicked, pretentious submissions, when they see themselves caught in order to escape from the snare, they still did not mean to mock God by their soft words, but rather under the pressure of necessity, they are ready to do anything and therefore offer propitiations and satisfactions. But when their fear has departed, because whatever they promised was forcibly extorted from them, they directly break out afresh. A very similar circumstance is related of Saul. I was reading about Saul when he confesses his own disgrace, the innocence of David, and yet as soon as he was escaped from the danger and is freed from fear, he does not cease to persecute him cruelly. But if we admit that this was a mere dissimulation, Pharaoh had a greater cause for fear, because being experimentally convinced that God was his adversary, he was impelled by fear to make any conditions whatever. But first of all, he acknowledged that he had sinned this time, not to excuse the former case, but because in such a gross contempt, the crime of obstinacy was more detestable, and this is more fully appeared in the following, where in acknowledgement the justice of God was there, and confessed the wickedness himself and his people. It is just as if he had said that he deservingly punished because he took too long to provoke God, who is just judge. Now, since as far as his words go, Pharaoh professes true repentance, and we may gather from them that the sinners do not attribute to God, but the honor due to his justice, unless they condemn themselves. And this must be more carefully observed, because there are few that think that while they are endeavoring to rebut the accusation of guiltiness, they are dishonoring God. And yet, whoever does not judge himself and who does not frankly confess his sins is assuredly murmuring against the judgment of God. Pharaoh at length has recourse to deprecation, in which he desires to have Moses and Aaron as his intercessors. Not, I admit, without deception, but because of they were hypocrites and double-hearted. Yet in certain that because he was terrified by troubles, he sought for peace with God, lest his rebellion should draw upon him and greater punishment. But as soon as having obtained his desire to cease to be afraid, the secret of his wickedness, which lay as it were stifled under him, immediately follows. So Pharaoh was hoping that whatever God did to him was a tactic that he figured, well, let me say I am sorry, I won't do it again. But then the thundering stopped, the hail stopped, and he figured, well, I'm the one that caused that to happen. But he realized that what he was doing was in his heart wasn't right, all the cruelty to the Israelites, that he decided to go back from his old ways to see if he could go back and try to kill the Israelites. And God had came in and put a stop to it, because his heart was hardened tremendously. And I learned from that, you cannot keep making mistakes and repent and come back and keep doing the same thing. And that was exactly what Pharaoh end up happening to him, because God gave him a lot of chances. And he was making a fool out of God by figuring out, well, I am a king, I have power, I can do what I want. And at the end of the day, he was the one who was lost. So for me, as an example of today's world, if you're forgiving your sins, you have to practice what you preach. Yep, thank you.
Amen.